Hello, I'm Gary Johnston, and this, my friend Carly Baxter. Welcome to this short series of videos. Today, I just wanted to do a quick overview of what we're going to talk about, and we're going, as a discussion, the discussion around relationships is kind of fascinating because it involves everybody. We all spend our entire lives actually developing and in most cases destroying relationships, as you would probably know, and that's why you're here, obviously. But there is a reason that that happens, and it's not always in your control at the moment, but it can be. So my background is as a psychotherapist, and I've specialized in looking at how the mind works for some 40 odd years. Yes, I'm that old. For 40 odd years, I've been working with people at the absolute cutting edge of emotional disorders, of dysfunctional relationships, and more specifically around anxiety disorders, primarily created by self-image issues. And self-image, as you're going to find out, is a very important component of is how we deal with other people, how we react or interact with other people. So that's my background, and the mind model that I developed over that 40 years has proven incredibly successful in being able to change the way people behave and the programs that we take on board when we're very, very young. Now, we're going to discuss this over a period of a couple of weeks, along with a whole range of other issues that are key elements of relationships. Now, when I talk about relationships, I'm talking about everything from friendships to family to one-on-one personal relationships to our life partner, if you like. And it also includes business relationships, because how you interact with other people depends on how they respond to you, and in a business sense, whether they're going to buy something from you or not. And really, the personal relationship aspect is very much a sales process. You've really got to sell yourself to somebody else in some cases to get them to sit up and take notice of you. Is that not correct? But we tend to overdo it, unfortunately. So, the elements of the relationships that are absolutely critical, there are four of them in real terms. One is trust, obviously, that everybody knows about. One is respect, which we tend to ignore a little bit, and it quite often goes out the window. One of the key ones that we're going to talk about is tolerance. And tolerance is not just putting up with people's bad behavior, but it's a tolerance for their values system, their belief and value system. If you don't have that tolerance and you drain the level of tolerance you have, the relationship's over, it's finished. So we'll talk about that in quite a bit of depth. And the fourth thing is the level of intimacy in a relationship will determine whether it is just a friendship or whether it's a full-on one-on-one relationship or whether it's simply a business relationship. Now, all of those things end up, you could be anywhere on a scale from 0 to 100 in any one of those four elements, and the interaction of those four things is what we're going to talk about, but more especially how to fix the problems that develop in relationships and why it's such a high failure rate. So, ready to go?
Absolutely. Let's start.
Okay.
But firstly, can we maybe touch on the features of this scale that you're talking about?
Okay. If you think about each of those four elements as being critical, so the trust, respect, tolerance, and intimacy, are all critical to any relationship. And if you get them wrong, the relationship will fail. Mm-hmm. Now, you can start off with all great intentions and you can meet somebody that you actually trust and respect because of how you perceive them initially. But your perception of other people is not necessarily correct. Mm-hmm. And the reason is because the way your unconscious mind reacts to other people will either determine whether you actually interact further with them or some component of their personality will actually attract you to them. But the way your unconscious mind sees things is not always accurate, and that's pretty nightmarish if you think about it. So, depending on where you are in each of those scales, you can actually find yourself slipping up and down on an almost hourly basis, anywhere on those scales, on each of those things. So one minute you can trust somebody implicitly, they'll say something and suddenly you slip down that scale quite dramatically.
True.
Same with respect. Somebody does something that doesn't fit inside your value system and suddenly they've slipped down that value component quite dramatically. So where you are on those scales will determine the type of relationship you have, the ability for that relationship to actually survive a hiccup, and hiccups happen all the times in relationships, and really, unless you can adjust that and understand the background of those scales and understand the background of how your self-image or your awareness of self interacts with those scales, then you haven't got a hope in hell of creating a relationship that's likely to last as we would normally think a relationship should be.
Wow.
Scary, isn't it?
Very.
Mm.
And it also seems that most relationships don't last as long as they should do. Most of them fail, in fact. So that's something very common.
They do, and statistically, it is really quite frightening. If you let's focus just on purely on personal relationships, but this actually applies also to other types of relationships. Out of 100 people in a one-on-one relationship, for instance, let's call it a marriage or call it whatever you like, but 60% of those relationships are going to fail. Statistically, that's the same everywhere in the world. 60% of relationships fail ultimately. And by that I mean people split up and go their own ways. Now, of the other 40%, 30% will stay in a relationship not because it's ideal or because it's even happy, but they'll stay in it because of the kids, because it's financially viable, because there's security in it, and people get scared about what's going to happen outside it. So they tend to stick together longer, and in some cases for a long, long time before they break up. But ultimately, it's not what you'd call a real relationship. They're basically two people living in the same house, and that's it. And quite often that is underpinned by arguments and all this sort of thing. And I know a lot of the people that you've dealt with have had that experience. So that means that 90% of people that are going to either break up completely and walk away, or they're going to stay in an unsatisfactory relationship. And the fact that you're watching this right now means that you've experienced that. Of the other 10%, about 9 out of those 10 are in initially a really good relationship where all those scales match up reasonably well. But 9 out of 10 people are in relationships that really are essentially good friendships. So they're living under the same roof, they get on really well together, they don't argue all that much, but eventually even in those relationships the sex dies, and you know, it's not an ideal relationship a la the description of what we believe is a perfect relationship. So it comes down to only 1%, 1 in 100 of personal relationships actually meet the criteria that we've bought the story on as being the ideal relationship. 1 in 100. That is really scary.
That's
getting
very
worse.
scary.
Okay.
Indeed.
So, what we're going to do in the next couple of weeks is have a discussion around all these elements, why relationships fail especially. The key elements of that, and the role of self-image, the way we see ourselves, affects all of those relationships, because if we don't have a good relationship with ourselves, we're likely to buy into relationships that are less than satisfactory. So we'll talk about that. But one of the things, or a couple of things that we really want to cover over the next couple of weeks is, how you can actually design a relationship based on an understanding of your values and another person's values. You can actually design a relationship where those values match to the degree where you get on pretty well together. All the main characteristics of values around money, sex, children, the key elements that each particular type of relationship must have to survive. We're going to show you exactly how to design that and how to overcome the issues in relationships that may already have problems, if they're worth correcting and surviving, of course, because not everybody should be in the relationships that they're actually in. Sometimes it's a lot easier just to walk away and find somebody else, and I've seen so many of examples of that over the last 40 odd years. So that's what we're going to do. Now, what I'm going to ask you to do is, just adjacent to this video, you'll see a little box to enter your email address and just your first name, and that's just so that we can send you a link. We don't want to be sending people links that don't really want them, so that's just to let us know that you really want this free information we're going to send you over the next couple of weeks. And let me tell you, and yes, I'm biased, but I think you'll find when you've been through what we're going to send you, that you will find that the time you spend over the next couple of weeks in watching this series of videos that we're going to send you, it could very well be the most valuable time that you ever spent in your life. When you consider all the millions of hours that you lose in trying to, and the dollars that you try to create relationships with, and then they end up failing anyway, spending an hour just looking at how you perceive yourself, how other people perceive you, and how you can link two minds in a relationship is really quite special information. And this stuff really works. So just fill in your email address and your first name. We'll send you an email with a link to the first of these free videos, and I think you will be spectacularly delighted. So we'll see you on the other side.